Let's take a trip back to the grim spring morning of May 19th, 1536, the day Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's dazzling and controversial second wife, faced her last moments beneath the cold shadow of the Tower of London. Try to imagine the psychological agony, the paralyzing anticipation twisting tightly around Anne's entire being as she was paraded, humiliated, and finally sentenced not only to die, but to vanish from history. This was no mere execution. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, Tudor style. We often speak about the drama of Anne's last half hour, but the torture began long before she ever stepped onto the scaffold. For 17 agonizing days, she was locked inside the same tower rooms where just 3 years earlier she had spent her nights as a newly crowned queen. That's not an accident. The setting was a deliberate jab, a reminder from her husband that her meteoric rise could be turned instantly into a catastrophic fall. What's often painted as royal mercy, the king's importation of a French swordsman instead of an English axeman, was actually the final stroke of Henry's twisted theater. Why a sword from Calais? It was dramatic, foreign, unsettling. It would guarantee all eyes were on Anne's death, and the cruelty would be as memorable as possible. And let's not forget, historically, English axes were horrendously unreliable. The switch guaranteed a clean kill for the crowd, sparing them the disgraceful spectacle of a botched execution, but amplifying the drama for maximum political effect. Witnesses later marveled at Anne's eerie composure. She prayed, she joked, she told her ladies they'd soon be calling her Anne with no head. To some, it looked like courage. To modern psychologists, maybe a textbook example of dissociation. That way, our minds sometimes shield us with numbness amid unbearable trauma. All the jokes in the world, though, couldn't mask the devastation. Anne had watched her name blackened across England. The charges, adultery, incest, even plotting to kill the king, were scandalous fictions designed to break not just her reputation, but her little daughter Elizabeth's future. Perhaps the most gut-wrenching part? Henry didn't just want Anne gone. He wanted her erased. Her memory, her lineage, her influence. The courtiers who had once fought over her favor now pretended not to see her. The festival atmosphere of her execution was stage-managed, not the mournful hush we see in movies, but a raucous, almost gleeful event, a warning to ambitious women everywhere that the king's word was absolute. That morning, Anne had been awake for almost 24 hours. She prayed deep into the night, wrestling with herself and her God in sleepless agony. When the lieutenant of the tower finally arrived, she greeted him with laughter, but witnesses described it as brittle, anxious. Laughter not of relief, but of a mind stretched towards its limit. And here's a detail you rarely read in history books. The scaffold was built unusually low, only about 3 feet high. Anne barely stepped up at all. No grand descent, just a direct, humiliating presentation to the jeering crowd, kept close so they could see every flicker of emotion on her face. Even her final speech was carefully orchestrated, her words balancing on a knife's edge. She said, "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, for according to the law, and by the law, I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it." This wasn't submission. It was Anne at her finest, still clever under unthinkable pressure, refusing to admit guilt, subtly highlighting the absurdity of the charges without handing her enemies a single soundbite. Almost no one mentions Henry, the architect of all this misery, wasn't even there. As Anne lost her head, her husband waited at Whitehall, planning his next wedding. The swordsman, a French expert paid a king's ransom, had rehearsed on animals to guarantee a swift end. Anne knelt upright, not over a thick block, but in the traditional French style, straining every muscle to keep herself perfectly still, listening for the nearly silent footsteps of her executioner. The tension must have been suffocating. Observers later insisted her lips kept moving. Lips that legend holds continued to form words even after the sword fell. The last vestiges of life visible for a heart-stopping few seconds. There's a visceral horror in that detail that's easy to overlook. And yet, it's the kind of thing that would haunt her ladies-in-waiting, some of whom never recovered from the trauma. In the confusion that followed, there wasn't even a coffin for her body, just an old box for arrows, hastily repurposed by devastated attendants. This minor neglect screams a larger truth. In death, as in life, Anne was transformed from beloved queen to royal inconvenience. And what about her little daughter? Elizabeth, barely 3, was declared illegitimate and cast aside, her household broken up overnight. The punishment extended in all directions. Even Anne's grave was left unmarked, as if to speed her erasure from memory. Her very presence, the emblems on the walls, her portraits, were destroyed or hidden. Survival itself was dangerous for those who dared utter her name. If you picture the scene today, standing on Tower Green, reading the memorial, you probably imagine the silent moment of reflection. A point I find fascinating. This wasn't just about killing a problematic queen. Nearly all the men accused alongside her, her own brother among them, were executed first, setting the official facts in stone before Anne could speak and possibly contradict them. By the time Anne stood before the crowd, her story had already been written by others. Once the dirty work was done, Henry's propaganda machine set to work. Poets churned out verses about Anne's wickedness. Her image was smeared across England. A king's mercy, they said, had given her a clean end. Never mind the careful psychological torture or the campaign to smear her name for generations. The cold-blooded speed at which Henry moved on is stunning. The morning after Anne's death, he was betrothed. 2 weeks later, he walked down the aisle again. No period of mourning, just business as usual. His dead wife reduced to a clause in his relentless pursuit of an heir. From a modern perspective, it's hard not to see Anne's fall as a chilling early example of character assassination, gaslighting, and outright psychological torment, all played out in public to reinforce one man's power. Most of the accusations against her wouldn't last 5 minutes in a modern court. Yet so meticulously controlled was the information, so absolute the threat of violence, that hardly a soul dared question the official version. And here's the final twist. The harder Henry tried to erase Anne, the more indelible she became. Her daughter, once cast aside, would rise to become one of England's greatest monarchs, Elizabeth I, a living reminder that you can't truly delete history, only distort it for a while. So next time you see Anne Boleyn imagined as a tragic but stoic victim, remember, her real story is much darker, much sharper. A warning about what happens when power turns against those who dare to challenge it. Her execution isn't just a dramatic chapter from the past. It's a timeless cautionary tale for any age where reputation, truth, and basic humanity can still be sacrificed to the whims of those in charge. If you made it this far through Anne's chilling story, tell us what part shocked you the most, or share your thoughts below. If you want to uncover more unsettling truth from history, and trust me, there are plenty more, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive. Thanks for watching, and remember, history is rarely as tidy as it appears.